Millionaire CEO sees a shivering little girl crawling in the snow. What he does next shocks everyone. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was a freezing winter evening, the kind that cuts through you, no matter how many layers you're wearing. The kind of cold that makes your bones ache and your breath turn to ice before it even escapes your mouth. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky a pale gray, a lonely figure walked down the desolate street. Caleb Whitmore, a millionaire CEO, was a man used to controlling everything around him. He had built his empire from the ground up, shaping it into a fortress of wealth and power. But tonight, he wasn't surrounded by the sleek glass walls of his office or the buzz of high-powered meetings. No, tonight, he was out here, walking aimlessly, not even sure why. His life was a carefully constructed routine, but lately, it had felt like something was missing. Despite all his success, there was a nagging emptiness inside him, one that no amount of money or accolades could fill. As he walked down the icy sidewalk, his thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound. At first, he thought it was just the wind howling through the streets, but then, it came again, a soft, weak cry. Caleb froze, his sharp instincts kicking in. His eyes scanned the area, but the streets were empty. No cars, no people, just the oppressive silence of the city at night. The sound came again, this time louder. It was the cry of a child, a cry so fragile, it seemed to pierce through the cold air like a cry for help. Caleb's heart skipped a beat as he realized that he wasn't alone after all. Following the sound, he approached the alleyway between two buildings. The shadows loomed large, swallowing up the little light that remained. And then, through the darkness, he saw her. A small figure huddled in. The snow, trembling violently. A little girl, no older than 6 or 7, was lying on the cold ground, her tiny body curled up as she tried to shield herself from the biting wind. Her clothes were ragged and soaked, and her face was streaked with dirt and tears. She was barely moving, and it looked as though she was struggling just to breathe. Caleb's heart tightened in his chest. The cold air seemed to freeze in his lungs as he took a step forward. "Hey," he called softly, crouching down beside her. The girl flinched at the sound of his voice, her eyes wide with fear. "It's okay," Caleb said, his voice gentle but firm. "You're safe now. I won't hurt you." She looked up at him, her large brown eyes filled with terror. "Please, don't let them take me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The words hit Caleb like a punch to the gut. He had no idea what she meant, but the raw emotion in her voice, the desperation, it was impossible to ignore. Without thinking, he scooped her up in his arms, feeling her shivering body pressed against his chest. He could hardly believe what he was doing, but in that moment, all the fear and doubt in his mind vanished. All he knew was that this little girl needed help, and he was the only one there to give it. Caleb looked around, unsure of what to do next. He could call the police, but there was something about the situation that told him he couldn't leave her. Not like this. He turned toward his car, his mind racing. "Hang on," he said, his voice reassuring but filled with urgency. "I'm going to get you somewhere warm." The little girl clung to him, her tiny hands gripping the fabric of his coat, as if she was afraid he might vanish. Caleb's heart ached as he walked toward his car, the weight of the situation sinking in. Who would do this to a child? Why was she out here alone, in the freezing cold? He had no answers, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to leave her until he figured it out. And that was just the beginning of a journey that would change both of their lives forever. The car's engine hummed softly as Caleb drove through the empty streets, the headlights cutting through the night's darkness. The little girl, wrapped tightly in his coat, was still shivering in his arms, her tiny body trembling against his chest. The cold had seeped into her skin, but it was more than just the physical chill. She was afraid, and Caleb could feel it. Every breath she took was shallow, her hands tightly gripping the fabric of his suit, as though she was afraid to let go. "It's going to be okay," Caleb whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to reassure her or himself. He didn't know what had happened to her or why she was alone. but something deep inside him told him that this was the moment when everything would change. His mind was racing as he made his way to the nearest hospital. The streets were quiet, almost eerie in their emptiness. As he passed the city's tall buildings, he felt a pang of loneliness. His life had been all business meetings, late nights, and numbers, but tonight, it felt like he was walking through a different world. The weight of the child in his arms made him realize how little he had truly been living. When they arrived at the hospital, Caleb didn't wait for a nurse to greet him. He rushed inside, his heart pounding in his chest. The cold air from the street had followed them in, and the sterile chill of the hospital's interior made the situation feel even more urgent. He didn't want to waste any time. The receptionist looked up in shock as Caleb approached, cradling the girl in his arms. "She needs help," Caleb said, his voice strained. "She's freezing, and I don't know what happened, but she's hurt." The receptionist quickly stood up, her face filled with concern. "Bring her right in," she said, motioning toward the triage area. Caleb followed her, his steps quick but careful as he held the girl close. She didn't make a sound now, her eyes closed tightly, and Caleb couldn't help but wonder what had happened to her. What kind of life had she been living that brought her to this moment? As the nurse examined her, Caleb stood off to the side, his heart in his throat. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random event. There was something deeper at play, something that was pulling him into this little girl's world. Her presence was like a mirror, showing him the emptiness of his own life. The nurse finally looked up at him, her expression serious. "She's weak from the cold, but it's not just that. There are signs of neglect." Caleb's stomach tightened. Neglect? The word hit him harder than he expected. He felt a pang of guilt, even though he had only just met her. "What should we do?" he asked, his voice softer now. The nurse shook her head. "We'll keep her here for now, get her warmed up. But we'll need to get in touch with the authorities. This isn't something we can ignore." Caleb nodded, though a part of him wanted to do more. He wanted to fix it, to make it right. He watched as the nurse continued to care for the girl, his mind spinning with questions. Who had done this to her? Why had she been left out in the cold? His thoughts were interrupted when the little girl's eyes fluttered open. She looked up at him, and for a moment, there was a flicker of recognition in her gaze. Then she whispered, barely audible, "Thank you." Her voice was small, fragile, and it broke something inside Caleb. He wasn't sure what had driven him to stop, to help her, but in that moment, he knew he couldn't just walk away. This little girl had touched something deep within him, and he wasn't about to let her go without knowing the truth of her story. As Caleb sat in the sterile waiting room of the hospital, he couldn't shake the image of the little girl's tear-streaked face. She had whispered, "Thank you," and those words had stuck with him like an anchor. He had no idea who she was or what had brought her to this moment, but it didn't matter. She needed him now, and for the first time in a long while, Caleb felt needed. The nurse had taken her to a room for further treatment, and Caleb had been left alone with his thoughts. His usual sharp mind, always focused on business, seemed to be clouded by a heavy weight. What kind of life had she led? Who had abandoned her in the cold, in a place like this? He couldn't stop thinking about the bruises he had seen on her arms earlier. What kind of cruelty made a child that small suffer so much? A part of him wanted to blame himself for not acting sooner, for not being more aware of the world outside his boardroom. But another part of him, something deeper, something more instinctual, knew that this was the moment. The moment he could change something, do something real. As the minutes ticked by, he tried to focus on the task at hand, but his mind kept drifting back to her. He could feel her fragility, her vulnerability, and it stirred something inside him, something that had been buried beneath layers of cold detachment for years. He had built an empire. He had earned billions, and yet none of it mattered if he couldn't make a difference in the life of this little girl. A part of him, a part he hadn't acknowledged in years, felt responsible. What had happened to her? Caleb needed answers. He couldn't leave until he knew. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the nurse returned. "She's stable," she said, her tone professional but soft. "She's resting now, but she'll need a lot of care." Caleb nodded, relieved, but still uneasy. He stood up, his decision made. "I'm not leaving until I know more," he said. The nurse looked at him, her eyes searching his face, but she said nothing. "I'll need to speak to someone who knows her," Caleb continued, his voice firm now. "Her name is Ava," the nurse said quietly. "She's been in and out of foster care for a while. Her mother died a few years ago, and her father, well, we don't have much information on him. We just know she's been through a lot. Caleb's heart sank as the nurse spoke. Foster care? A dead mother? A father who had disappeared? It was a heartbreaking story, and it made Caleb's chest tighten with a feeling he couldn't quite describe. He had always thought of himself as a self-made man, someone who had risen above everything life had thrown at him. But now, in this moment, as he listened to the nurse, he realized how little he truly understood about the struggles of those who didn't have the privileges he had. He had always been able to fix things, to control things, but now he was faced with something far beyond his expertise. How could he fix this? How could he help this little girl who had been discarded by the world find her way? Caleb wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. He couldn't walk away. Not now, not when she needed him. Ava had been through more than any child should ever have to endure, and Caleb knew that he had the power to change her future. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be fast, but he was willing to do whatever it took to help her. As he stood there, a promise formed in his mind, a promise he knew he had to keep. He wouldn't let her fall through the cracks. He would be the one to lift her up. Through the blinds, Caleb knew he couldn't wait any longer. He needed answers. He needed to find out what had happened to her, and he needed to find a way to make things right. He decided to go to the foster care office. It was a place he had never thought much about, a place that seemed so far removed from his world of business deals and corporate meetings. But now, it was the place that could give him the answers he needed. Caleb walked into the office, his heart pounding. The walls were adorned with pictures of happy families, and the atmosphere was warm, but there was a sense of sadness that hung in the air. He approached the receptionist, his voice steady but filled with urgency. I'm looking for information about a little girl named Ava, he said. She's in the hospital right now, and I need to know everything about her. The receptionist looked up at him, her face sympathetic but guarded. I'm sorry, sir, but due to confidentiality laws, I can't give you that information, she said. Caleb's frustration bubbled to the surface. I know her situation, he said, trying to keep his voice calm. I'm offering to help her. I want to take her in. Please, I need to know what happened to her. The receptionist hesitated for a moment before nodding. Let me see what I can do, she said, before disappearing behind a door. Caleb waited in silence, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Was he ready to take this on? Could he truly provide Ava with the stability and love she needed? He didn't know, but he was determined to try. After what felt like an eternity, the receptionist returned. She had a folder in her hands. Ava's case is a complex one, she said softly, sitting down across from Caleb. She's been in and out of foster care for a while. Her mother passed away when she was very young, and her father, well, he's been absent for most of her life. We've tried to find him, but so far, we haven't had any luck. Caleb listened, his heart aching for Ava. The more he heard, the more he understood just how much she had been through. There are other families who've taken her in, the receptionist continued, but none of them have been able to keep her for long. She's been bounced around a lot. It's been hard for her to settle down. Caleb nodded slowly, his mind processing everything. Ava had been through so much already. But now, he was here, and he was offering her something different. He wasn't sure how it was all going to work, but he knew one thing for sure. He was going to do whatever it took to give her a chance at a better life. Caleb stood at the doorstep of the foster care office, his heart pounding with anticipation. It had been a week since he first met Ava, and in that short time, his life had changed in ways he couldn't have predicted. He had never imagined himself stepping into the world of foster care or being responsible for a child. But now, as he looked at the folder in his hand, he knew there was no turning back. He had already made up his mind. He was going to take Ava in. The receptionist had given him the necessary paperwork, and he had been told that Ava's case would require approval from social services. But Caleb wasn't going to let that stop him. He had the resources, the determination, and most importantly, he had a deep, almost instinctual sense that this was the right thing to do. As he walked back to his car, he couldn't help but think about what Ava had been through. She had been bounced around from foster home to foster home, never staying long enough to form any real connections. And now, Caleb was going to offer her a home, a real home. His home. It wasn't much. It wasn't perfect, but it was something stable, something she could count on. The more he thought about it, the more determined he became. Caleb had always been a man of control, a man who made decisions with precision and clarity. But this was different. This was about offering a child something that no amount of money or success could provide: love, security, and stability. He drove home, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders, and as he entered his penthouse, he was greeted by the silence. It felt different now. The emptiness of the place seemed to magnify, a constant reminder of what had been missing from his life all these years. He had filled his world with work, with business, with achievement, but none of that had filled the void inside him. Ava had come into his life like a whirlwind, and for the first time, he felt the possibility of something real. He looked at the clock. Time was running out. The foster care system worked slowly, and he knew that if he wanted to get the approval he needed to take Ava in, he had to act fast. The next morning, Caleb made his first call to social services. He spoke to a caseworker named Rachel, a woman with a calm, professional demeanor. She listened as Caleb explained his desire to take Ava in, and he could hear the skepticism in her voice as she asked about his qualifications. "This isn't a decision that we take lightly," Rachel said. "Ava's been through a lot, and we need to make sure she's going into the right environment." Caleb understood. He had no experience with raising children, but he wasn't going to let that deter him. "I'm ready to take on the responsibility," he said. "I may not know everything, but I promise I'll do whatever it takes to give her the stability she needs." Rachel paused, and Caleb could sense her hesitation. "I'll need to speak with my supervisor," she said, her tone softening. "I'll call you back in a few hours." Caleb waited, his nerves getting the best of him. He couldn't wait to bring Ava into his home, but the waiting was unbearable. When Rachel finally called back, her voice was more upbeat. "We've reviewed your case," she said, "and we think it could be a good fit. We'll set up a meeting for you to meet with Ava and discuss the next steps." Caleb let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It was official. Ava was going to be part of his life, part of his world. He hung up the phone and looked out the window at the city skyline. The future seemed uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Caleb felt a sense of hope. He wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was going to be a father, and he was going to give Ava the chance she deserved. The day Caleb met with Rachel and the social services team felt like a turning point. He had been nervous, uncertain about how things would go, but the moment he walked into that room and saw Ava for the first time since her time in the hospital, something clicked. She was sitting on a small chair in the corner of the room, her eyes wide and cautious as she watched him enter. Her face was still pale, but the small spark of curiosity in her gaze made Caleb feel a little lighter. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was committed. He sat down across from her, his hands resting nervously on the table. "Hi, Ava," he said softly, giving her a small smile. "How are you feeling today?" Ava didn't answer right away. Instead, she shifted in her seat, looking down at her hands, which were folded tightly in her lap. Caleb could see that she was nervous. He didn't know what kind of life she had lived before this, but it was clear that she wasn't used to being around people who genuinely cared for her. "I know this is a big change," Caleb continued, his voice gentle, "but I want you to know that you're safe now. I'm here to help." Ava looked up at him then, her eyes searching his face. She said nothing, but the look she gave him seemed to carry 1,000 questions, all wrapped up in one silent gaze. Caleb's heart ached at the thought of what she had been through, and he made a silent promise to himself that he would do whatever it took to make her feel loved and secure. After a long pause, Rachel spoke up. "Ava," she said gently, "this is Caleb. He's here because he wants to help you. He's offering you a home." Ava's gaze flickered from Rachel to Caleb and back again. Caleb could tell that she was processing everything, trying to make sense of it all. "Ava," Rachel continued, "if you're ready, we'd like you to go with Caleb. He's going to take care of you." For a moment, Caleb wasn't sure what Ava would do. She seemed so small, so fragile, like a bird with a broken wing. He could see that she wanted to trust him, but the fear was still there, lingering just beneath the surface. Then, slowly, Ava stood up from her chair. Caleb's heart beat a little faster. Was she really ready for this? He had no idea what she had gone through, but in that moment, he understood that she was taking a leap of faith. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll go with you." Caleb smiled, his chest swelling with a mixture of relief and determination. "Thank you," he said, standing up to follow her. Rachel, who had been watching the interaction closely, gave Caleb a supportive nod. "You're doing the right thing," she said. Caleb nodded, then turned back to Ava, who was now standing at his side. The two of them walked out of the room together, heading toward a new chapter in both of their lives. The drive back to Caleb's penthouse was quiet. Ava sat in the back seat, her gaze fixed out the window as the city passed by. Caleb wasn't sure what was going through her mind, but he could tell that she was overwhelmed. He had no idea what to expect, but he was prepared to take things one day at a time. When they arrived at the penthouse, Caleb showed Ava to her new room. It was simple, but warm, with soft lighting and a bed that looked far more comfortable than the hospital bed she had been in. He wanted her to feel at home, but he knew that it would take time. "This is your room," Caleb said gently. "I know it's a lot to take in, but you can stay here as long as you need." Ava nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the room. Caleb stood at the door, waiting for her to say something, anything. But she didn't. Instead, she walked over to the bed and sat down, her hands folding in her lap once more. Caleb gave her space, stepping out of the room quietly. He knew this was just the beginning, and there was so much more to do, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't just changing her life, she was changing his too. The days following Ava's arrival at Caleb's penthouse were filled with a mixture of quiet anticipation and nervous energy. Caleb had never been a father, not in the traditional sense. He had always been so focused on his work, his company, and his achievements. But now, with Ava in his care, things were different. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to do next, but he knew he had to be there for her, and he was determined to figure it out. Ava remained mostly silent, quietly adjusting to the new surroundings. She had not spoken much since they arrived, and Caleb could see how overwhelmed she was. She would spend hours in her room, staring out the window or tracing her fingers over the edges of the furniture, as though she were still trying to process everything that had happened to her. Caleb respected her space. He knew it would take time for her to trust him, and he wasn't going to rush her. Every evening, after a long day of work, he would sit in the living room, waiting for her to join him. Some nights, she would come out to watch TV with him, her eyes glued to the screen, as though the shows were the only thing that could keep her mind from drifting back to the past. Other nights, she would remain in her room, and Caleb would quietly bring her dinner, leaving it on the desk beside her bed. As the weeks passed, Caleb began to notice small changes in her behavior. She was starting to smile more often, even if it was just a faint smile when he made her laugh with a silly joke. She was becoming more comfortable, and the bond between them was slowly growing. One evening, as the sun set and the city lights began to flicker on, Caleb sat on the couch, glancing over some reports. He heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching. Ava stood in the doorway of the living room, her expression unreadable. "Can I watch with you tonight?" she asked, her voice quiet but hopeful. Caleb looked up, a sense of warmth flooding through him. "Of course," he said, smiling gently. Ava walked over and sat down next to him, her hands folded in her lap. They watched a movie together, a simple action flick that Caleb had picked, but he noticed that Ava was more relaxed than usual. As the movie progressed, she leaned slightly against him, and he could feel the weight of her small frame pressing gently into his side. Caleb didn't move. He didn't want to break the fragile connection they were beginning to build. For the first time since Ava had arrived, Caleb allowed himself to relax. He didn't need to fix everything at once. He didn't need to have all the answers. He just needed to be there for her. That was all that mattered. As the credits rolled, Ava looked up at him. "Thank you," she whispered. The words were simple, but they meant everything to Caleb. It was the first time she had said anything that resembled gratitude, and it filled him with a deep sense of relief. He didn't need to hear her thank him, but hearing it made him realize that, despite everything, he was doing the right thing. He was giving her something she had never had before: stability, safety, and a chance to heal. "You're welcome, Ava," Caleb replied softly. "I'm happy you're here." That night, Caleb went to bed with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but he was ready. For Ava, and for himself, he was ready to build a new life. And in the quiet moments, like this one, he knew he was finally on the right path. Over the next few months, Caleb's life began to shift in ways he couldn't have imagined. The once sterile and empty penthouse now had a new energy. There were the sounds of footsteps down the hallway, the occasional laughter, and even the quiet hum of a television on in the background. Ava was beginning to find her place in this new life, though it wasn't without its challenges. Caleb could see the walls she had built around herself slowly starting to crack, but he also knew that healing wasn't something that could happen overnight. They spent most of their days in quiet routine. Caleb would go to work, and Ava would stay home, adjusting to the new environment. Sometimes, she would spend her time reading or drawing in her room, and other times, she would join him in the living room while he worked on his laptop. It was a peaceful coexistence, but Caleb knew there was still a long road ahead. He had learned not to push her, letting her take the lead when it came to connecting. But little by little, she began to open up. One evening, after dinner, Caleb and Ava were sitting together in the living room, watching an old family movie. Ava had always been a little reserved when it came to her past, but tonight, something was different. She turned to him and asked softly, "Why did you decide to help me?" The question hit Caleb harder than he expected. He had never really thought about it in such direct terms. He had just done what felt right. But now, looking into Ava's eyes, he understood that this wasn't just about offering her a roof over her head. It was about giving her a chance to feel safe, to feel like she mattered. He thought for a moment before answering. "I don't know," he said, his voice quiet. "I guess I saw you, and I realized that you deserve more. More than what you've been through. More than what life has given you so far." Ava seemed to consider this for a long time, her gaze fixed on the screen in front of them. Caleb could see the wheels turning in her mind. He wasn't sure what she was thinking, but he could feel the shift in the air. It wasn't just the act of helping her anymore. It was about showing her that she was worth more than the pain and neglect she had experienced. Ava finally looked up at him, her eyes soft. "Thank you," she whispered. The words were simple, but they held so much weight. Caleb smiled, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. He hadn't needed her to say thank you, but hearing it felt like a breakthrough, like the beginning of something truly special. "You don't have to thank me," Caleb said. "I'm just doing what anyone would do." But deep down, he knew it wasn't just about being anyone. He was becoming someone important in her life, and she, in turn, was becoming important in his. A few weeks later, Caleb took Ava to a local park on a sunny afternoon. It was one of those days when everything seemed to align perfectly, the sun shining, the air warm, and the park bustling with families enjoying the weather. Ava was quieter than usual as they walked along the path, but Caleb could sense she was starting to enjoy herself. They stopped near the playground, and Caleb watched as Ava tentatively approached the swings. He stayed at a distance, not wanting to push her, but hoping she would take the opportunity. Slowly, she climbed onto one of the swings and started to push herself back and forth, her face lighting up with a small, hesitant smile. Caleb's heart swelled as he watched her. It was a small moment, but it was a victory. Artwork, her fingers gently tracing the edges of the frames as if she could feel the emotion behind the brushstrokes. As they moved through the museum, Ava stopped in front of one painting in particular, a landscape of a vast, open field under a setting sun. The colors were warm, and the scene was serene. Caleb watched as she stood in front of it for several minutes, her gaze fixed on the painting. "What do you think?" Caleb asked, breaking the silence. Ava looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "I want to paint like that someday." Caleb felt a surge of pride. It was the first time he had heard her express a desire for something beyond just surviving, beyond just getting by. It was a glimpse of the future, a future where Ava could dream again. As they left the museum, Caleb made a silent promise to her. He would support her, no matter what. She would have the opportunity to pursue her dreams, and he would be there every step of the way. In the weeks that followed, Caleb continued to see small changes in Ava. She began to draw more often, filling up sketchbooks with scenes of nature, animals, and people. Caleb was amazed by the talent she had, and he encouraged her to take lessons, to explore her creativity. He even arranged for her to take a few weekend art classes at a local community center. It was something Ava had never had the chance to do before, and Caleb could see how much it meant to her. But it wasn't just art that was changing Ava, it was everything. She was becoming more comfortable with herself, more willing to speak up, more open to the world around her. And Caleb realized, as much as he was helping her, she was helping him too. He had spent so many years focusing on business and achievement, but now, through Ava, he was rediscovering the importance of connection, of human relationships, of family. One evening, As they sat together on the couch, watching a movie, Ava turned to him and said, "I think I'm starting to like it here." Caleb looked at her, his heart swelling. "I'm glad," he said softly. "This is your home now, Ava. You're safe here." She smiled, and for the first time, it was a full, genuine smile. Caleb couldn't help but smile back, knowing that they were both exactly where they needed to be. As the months went by, the bond between Caleb and Ava continued to grow stronger. What had started as a simple act of kindness had turned into something far more meaningful, something that neither of them could have anticipated. Caleb had always been a man of control, used to making decisions and running a business with precision. But now, he was navigating uncharted territory, learning how to care for a child, learning how to be a father. Ava, too, had changed. She was no longer the shy, reserved girl who had entered his life months ago. She was more confident now, more willing to engage with the world around her. It wasn't just the art classes Caleb had enrolled her in or the routine they had established together. It was something deeper, something about the stability Caleb had offered her, the safety of knowing that no matter what happened, she had a place where she belonged. One afternoon, Caleb was sitting at his desk, reviewing some documents, when Ava entered the room holding a piece of paper. She was no longer the quiet girl who would retreat into herself. Now, she came to him when she had something to share. "Look, Caleb," she said, holding up the paper. "I finished it." Caleb put down the papers he was looking at and turned his attention to her. Ava had drawn a picture, something simple, but it was the most beautiful thing Caleb had ever seen. It was a drawing of the two of them, standing together in front of a house, with a bright sun shining down on them. There was something in the way she had drawn it that made Caleb feel a lump form in his throat. "It's amazing, Ava," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She smiled, a proud, shy smile that made his heart swell. "I wanted to draw us. I wanted to draw how it feels now." Caleb couldn't help but smile back, a sense of warmth flooding through him. It was the first time Ava had truly opened up to him, and it meant more than she could know. "You've come so far," Caleb said softly, his voice full of pride. "You've really come a long way." Ava nodded, but then her expression changed, and Caleb could see that something was on her mind. "Caleb," she said, her voice quiet. Do you think I'll ever be okay? I mean really okay?" Caleb stood up and walked over to her, his heart aching at the vulnerability in her eyes. He knelt down so he was at her level, looking into her face. "Ava, you are already okay," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You are stronger than you know. It's going to take time, but you're on the right path. You have me, and you have yourself. You'll be more than okay." Ava's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. She had been carrying so much weight for so long, and Caleb realized that this moment, this simple reassurance, was the beginning of her healing. Caleb wrapped his arms around her in a tight hug, holding her close. "I'm here for you, Ava," he whispered. "And I always will be." After that moment, something changed between them. It wasn't just the safety Caleb had promised her. It was the emotional connection that was finally forming. Ava began to trust him fully, and for the first time, Caleb allowed himself to fully embrace the role of being a father. He wasn't perfect, and he didn't have all the answers, but he knew that he was doing his best, and that was all that mattered. As the seasons changed, Caleb continued to support Ava, helping her heal, helping her grow. And in turn, Ava taught Caleb about the power of love, patience, and trust. He had always believed that success was measured in wealth and power, but now, he understood that true success was measured by the connections we make, the lives we touch, and the hearts we help heal. It wasn't about the boardroom or the deals anymore. It was about family. And for Caleb, family was everything. The months that followed were full of quiet victories for both Caleb and Ava. Their lives had settled into a rhythm, one that was familiar and comfortable, but still new for both of them. Caleb had grown used to the sounds of Ava's footsteps echoing through the halls, the sight of her sitting at the table, drawing or reading, her focus so intense. Ava had found a sense of normalcy, and Caleb, for the first time in a long while, had learned to slow down and appreciate the small moments. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Caleb sat at his desk, reviewing a few business contracts. Ava had been in her room, working on another piece of artwork she'd been passionate about. It wasn't the same picture-perfect family that Caleb had once imagined, but it was a family nonetheless. A real family. Ava came into the room quietly, holding her drawing in front of her, her face a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Caleb, look," she said, her voice hesitant but hopeful. Caleb turned from his work and gave her his full attention. She held up the drawing, and Caleb's heart swelled in his chest. It was a picture of a family, 2 adults, a little girl, and a dog. The colors were vibrant, the shapes simple yet full of life. And in the center of it all, there was a bright sun shining down, just like the sun in the landscape painting Ava had admired months ago. It's amazing, Ava," Caleb said, his voice full of pride. Ava smiled shyly but didn't say anything. Caleb walked over to her, kneeling down to meet her eye level. "This is us, isn't it?" he asked gently. Ava nodded, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "I think so," she whispered. In that moment, Caleb knew that Ava had come to see him as more than just a guardian. She had begun to see him as a father, and for Caleb, that was a moment of quiet triumph. The bond they had built together, the trust, the understanding, it was more than he could have hoped for when he first decided to take her in. That night, as Caleb tucked Ava into bed, he sat beside her for a few moments, watching her as she closed her eyes. "Good night, Ava," he said softly. She opened her eyes and looked up at him, her expression serious but gentle. "Good night, Caleb. Thank you for everything." Caleb smiled, his heart full. "You don't need to thank me, Ava. You're home now, and that's all that matters." As he left the room, he couldn't help but reflect on how far they had both come. The lonely, driven man he had once been was now someone completely different. And the girl who had walked into his life, broken and afraid, was becoming someone full of potential, hope, and dreams. Caleb knew that their journey wasn't over, that there would be challenges ahead, but he also knew that no matter what came their way, they had each other. And for Caleb, that was more than enough. He had learned that love wasn't about perfection or grand gestures. It was about being there, day in and day out, offering a steady hand, a listening ear, and a heart full of compassion. As Ava drifted off to sleep, Caleb stood in the doorway, his heart lighter than it had been in years. They had built something real, something lasting. Together, they were healing, and for the first time in his life, Caleb understood what true success was. It wasn't about business or achievements. It was about love, family, and the connections we make with those we hold dear. And in that moment, Caleb knew that his life had become everything he had always dreamed of, not in the way he had once imagined, but in a way that was far better. It was the life he had created with Ava, and it was perfect. The spring came gently, with warm sunlight filling the rooms of Caleb's penthouse. Ava had blossomed in ways that even Caleb could not have imagined. The shy, withdrawn girl who had arrived months ago was now more confident, more expressive, and, most importantly, more at ease in her new life. Caleb watched as she made herself breakfast one morning, humming softly to herself as she set the table. It was a simple moment, but one that meant so much. Ava was starting to find joy in the little things. Caleb, too, was finding joy in their shared moments. There was a sense of peace in their home now, a quiet harmony that had grown between them. Caleb no longer felt the weight of uncertainty that had hung over him when he first took Ava in. They had become a family, and it was becoming more real with each passing day. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Caleb turned to Ava, who was sketching in her notebook, lost in concentration. "Ava," he said softly, drawing her attention. She looked up, her eyes wide. "Yes. I've been thinking," Caleb began. "I know things haven't always been easy for you. I'm sure there's still a lot you're processing. But I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what. You're not alone in this." Ava looked at him, her gaze steady and thoughtful. For a moment, she didn't say anything, but then she slowly put her pencil down and gave him a small smile. "I know," she said quietly. "I think I'm starting to believe it." Caleb's heart swelled with pride. It was the first time she had said something like that, and it felt like a milestone. Ava was starting to trust him completely, and that trust was the foundation for everything they were building together. As the weeks passed, Caleb continued to support Ava in every way he could. He took her to more art classes, encouraged her to explore her creative talents, and gave her space to figure out what she wanted from life. Slowly, Ava began to open up about her past, sharing bits and pieces of the life she had left behind. She told Caleb about her mother, about the pain of losing her at such a young age, and about the uncertainty that came with moving from one foster home to another. Caleb listened, never pushing her to talk more than she was comfortable with. He knew that healing came in its own time, and he was patient. One day, as they sat at the kitchen table, Ava turned to him, her face serious. "Caleb," she said, her voice quiet, "do you ever miss your old life?" "Before I came here." Caleb paused, the question catching him off guard. He thought about it for a moment, then shook his head. "No," he said slowly. "I used to think that everything I wanted was in my career, in the company. But when you came into my life, Ava, I realized that this right here, is what truly matters. Family, connection, love. That's what makes life worth living." Ava's eyes softened, and for the first time, Caleb saw a true understanding in her gaze. "I'm glad you're here," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. Caleb smiled. "I'm glad you're here too." They had both come a long way. Caleb had come to understand the value of relationships, of truly being present for the people you care about. And Ava had found a sense of belonging, a place where she could heal, grow, and build a future. Together, they were creating a new life, one that was full of hope and possibilities. As they sat there together, Caleb realized that, despite all the struggles they had faced, this was exactly where they were meant to be. A family, in the truest sense of the word. And he couldn't imagine his life any other way. The years passed, and life for Caleb and Ava settled into a comfortable routine. What had started as a simple act of kindness, a decision to open his heart and home to a child in need, had transformed both of their lives in ways neither of them could have predicted. Ava was now a young teenager, and Caleb could see the person she was becoming, strong, confident, and full of potential. She had flourished in the safety and stability Caleb had provided, and she had found her passion for art, which she continued to develop. Caleb watched with pride as she completed her first major project for an art show at her school, a beautiful landscape that captured the world in a way that only she could. Ava had always had a natural talent, but seeing it shine through so vividly made Caleb realize how far she had come. She had gone from a shy, reserved girl to someone who had a voice, someone who was no longer defined by her past, but by the dreams she was chasing. Caleb, too, had changed. His relationship with Ava had redefined his understanding of what truly mattered in life. He had spent so many years focused on work, on climbing the ladder of success, but now he understood that true fulfillment came from the connections we build and the people we love. Ava had taught him more than he could ever have imagined. She had shown him the power of patience, the importance of empathy, and the quiet strength that comes from truly being present for someone. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Caleb looked at Ava, who was sitting across from him, her sketchbook in hand. "I'm really proud of you, Ava," he said, his voice full of emotion. Ava smiled, her eyes lighting up. "I'm proud of you too, Caleb. You gave me a chance when no one else did. You made me believe in myself." Caleb's heart swelled as he looked at her. "You did all the hard work, Ava. I just gave you the space to grow." They sat there in silence for a moment, both reflecting on the journey they had been on. It hadn't always been easy, but it had been worth it. As the years passed, Caleb and Ava continued to support each other, their bond growing stronger with time. Caleb had become more than just her guardian. He had become her father in every sense of the word. And Ava, who had once been a scared, abandoned child, had become the center of his world. The family they had built together wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough. Ava graduated from high school with honors and was accepted into a prestigious art school. Caleb was there, cheering her on as she walked across the stage, a proud father watching his daughter take the next step in her journey. It was a moment of triumph for both of them, a culmination of everything they had worked toward. As Caleb watched Ava step into the future, he couldn't help but think back to that cold night when he had found her in the snow. He had never expected that one decision would change everything, but it had. It had given him a purpose beyond his career, a family that had filled the emptiness he had once felt. It had taught him that the greatest achievements in life weren't measured by money or success. They were measured by the love we give and receive, the lives we touch, and the bonds we form. And as he watched Ava step into her future, he knew that their story was only just beginning. Together, They had built a life full of love, hope, and possibility. And in that moment, Caleb realized that the greatest gift he had ever received wasn't wealth or power. It was the chance to be part of Ava's life, to be her father, and to witness the beautiful person she had become. This touching story follows the journey of a millionaire CEO who transforms his life by opening his heart to a young girl in need. A series of touching stories unfold as Caleb, a successful but emotionally distant man, decides to help Ava, a little girl abandoned in the snow. Through their journey together, Caleb learns the true meaning of family and love. Ava, once broken and fearful, finds herself slowly healing and growing stronger as Caleb becomes more than just her guardian. He becomes the father she never had. These touching stories demonstrate the power of kindness and the importance of creating a safe space for those who need it the most. As Ava blossoms into a young woman, Caleb realizes that the most important things in life are not wealth or success, but love, family, and the meaningful connections we make along the way. This touching story is a testament to the profound impact that a simple act of kindness can have on both people involved. It shows how touching stories can change lives, heal past wounds, and lead to a future full of love and possibility. Through the trials and triumphs they face, Caleb and Ava's bond grows stronger, teaching us that touching stories are not just about overcoming challenges, but about finding the strength to love and support each other no matter what comes our way. This is a touching story that will remind you of the importance of kindness, compassion, and never giving up on those you love.